The evening rain had barely stopped when Sandra walked out of the hospital. Her black braided hair clung to her shoulders, glistening with droplets beneath Seoul's fading streetlights. The city buzzed as usual, neon signs blinking, engines roaring, and couples rushing past with umbrellas. But Sandra's pace was slow, measured, like someone who had walked through too much chaos to rush anymore. Being one of the few African doctors working at Seoul General, she was already used to stares, some curious, some judging, some even admiring. But none of those glances bothered her tonight. Not after the surgery she'd just completed, a 2-hour battle between life and death with a man who refused to die. She didn't know his name.
She didn't ask.
She only knew that he'd been shot twice and that the men who brought him in wore black suits, spoke in clipped Korean, and had guns hidden beneath their jackets. She had seen fear before, but the kind she'd seen in the nurse's eyes tonight? That was something else. Dr. Sandra, one of the men had said earlier, his tone sharp, emotionless. You must save him. No questions. You understand. Sandra had only nodded, pulling on her gloves. Questions could wait. A man was dying. Now, outside, as she unlocked her car, a low, sleek black vehicle rolled up behind her. The tinted windows slid down. Dr. Sandra, a voice said, deep, commanding, yet disturbingly calm. Sandra turned, her heart thudding. Yes. The man stepped out. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, his sharp jawline catching the reflection of streetlight. His suit looked expensive, his eyes darker than the storm that had just passed. She had seen him before. Once, in the emergency room hallway, standing silent while his men hovered around the dying patient. You're the doctor who touched Sukong, the man said. Sandra frowned. If you mean the man I operated on, yes. He's still unconscious. The man's gaze hardened. He's not just any man. Sandra folded her arms, irritation flickering. You're welcome for saving his life, then. He stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to shoot her or laugh. Then, surprisingly, his lips twitched into the faintest smirk. You're brave, he said quietly. That's rare in this city. I'm not brave, she replied. I'm just doing my job. The smirk deepened. And yet, you dared to slap the most feared man in Seoul. Sandra blinked. What? He stepped closer, his presence like a shadow swallowing her space. Sukong, the boss. When he tried to grab your wrist during the operation, you slapped him. Her breath caught. She remembered. The adrenaline, the tension, the blood loss, and the man on the table suddenly jerking awake mid-surgery, reaching for her hand. It had been instinct. She'd slapped him hard enough to make his body go limp again as anesthesia took over. I didn't know who he was, she said defensively. He was delirious, and I. The man raised his hand. I'm not angry. I just find it amusing. Sandra frowned. Amusing? He leaned closer, voice dropping low. No one touches Sukong, and lives to tell about it. Her pulse quickened. Are you threatening me? He straightened again, his tone chillingly casual. Not at all. I'm warning you. Before she could speak again, another car door opened, and the man from the hospital emerged. Sukong. The legend. The ghost. The name whispered in the underworld like a curse. Sandra froze. He looked impossibly calm. Dressed in a black coat, a faint bandage still visible near his collarbone, his expression unreadable. His black eyes found hers, and something dark and magnetic sparked there, something she couldn't name. So, he said in a low voice, you're the woman who slapped me. Sandra's throat went dry. You were bleeding to death. And you thought that required hitting me? You were delirious, she snapped. And if you're standing here alive, then you should thank me, not question me. For a second, silence reigned. The men around them tensed, hands twitching near their coats. But Sukong laughed. A low, dangerous laugh that sent chills down her spine. You have fire, he said, taking a step closer. What's your name? Dr. Sandra. Sandra, he repeated slowly, tasting the syllables like they were something forbidden. Beautiful name. I'm not interested in your compliments, she said firmly, brushing past him toward her car. But as she reached for the door handle, his voice stopped her cold. "Be careful, Dr. Sandra. The world I live in doesn't forgive easily. But I do owe you something, my life." She turned, meeting his gaze again, that chilling, unreadable stare that seemed to look through her. "Keep your life," she said. "That's all I wanted." Then she drove away, leaving him standing in the drizzle, a man who'd faced countless enemies, yet felt something new for the first time. A challenge. Weeks later, Sandra tried to forget him. She buried herself in hospital shifts, surgeries, and late-night ramen. Yet every now and then, her phone would buzz, an unknown number, a text she didn't answer. Until one evening, after a long surgery, she returned to her apartment and froze. A single white rose sat on her dining table. And, beside it, a note. "You saved my life. Now, let me into yours. SK." Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. Then came the knock. When she opened the door, Sukong stood there, his eyes softer now, but no less dangerous. "I told myself I'd stay away," he said quietly. "But I can't." Sandra crossed her arms. "You're trespassing." He smirked. "You're right. Should I call your landlord and buy the building first?"
She glared.
"You think you can buy everything?" "Not everything," he said. "But maybe someone." Her jaw clenched. "I'm not for sale." "I didn't say you were." He took a slow step closer. "I just said I want you." The air thickened. Her heartbeat thundered. "This is crazy," she murmured. "Maybe," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "But so is every first love." Their eyes locked. For a second, she felt herself sway toward him, then stopped, forcing herself back. "I'm not your toy, Mr. Kong." "I don't play with toys," he said, his gaze darkening. "I claim what's mine." Her breath caught. "I'm not yours." He smiled faintly. "Not yet." The following days were chaos. He sent her flowers to the hospital, waited by her car, even donated to the hospital's expansion wing, under her name. Everyone began whispering. "Who is this man sending luxury cars and bouquets to Dr. Sandra? You think she's dating someone rich?" "She's lucky." But Sandra didn't feel lucky. She felt hunted. Then one night, after a particularly bad day, she came home and found Sukong waiting again, leaning against her doorway. "I told you to stop this," she said angrily. He straightened, his expression unreadable. "And if I say I can't, then I'll call the police." He stepped closer, eyes burning. "The police work for me." That stopped her cold. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. He looked at her for a long moment, then, to her shock, his voice dropped. "Because no one's ever looked at me the way you did that night." "The night I slapped you?" "Yes." His lips curved faintly. "You looked at me like a man, not a monster." Sandra's anger faltered. Beneath his calm exterior, she saw exhaustion and something deeper. Loneliness. She swallowed hard. "That doesn't mean I want you in my life." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll wait." And he did. Every day. Every week. Until, somehow, she stopped fighting him. Until the nights turned into quiet dinners. Until the arguments turned into laughter. Until the slap that started it all turned into a kiss she never expected. "You're dangerous," she whispered one night, when his fingers brushed her cheek. "So are you," he replied softly, pulling her close. "Why me?" "Because you make me feel human." And that was how it began. The ruthless mafia boss who swore never to love again fell for the doctor who had the courage to slap him back to life. The first snow came early that year. Sandra watched it fall through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sukong's penthouse, flakes drifting like white ash over the glittering skyline. It had been 3 weeks since she'd last seen the hospital. 3 weeks since the night he'd kissed her and told her he would never hurt her, and 3 weeks of trying to believe him. The apartment smelled faintly of sandalwood and coffee. Somewhere in the background a piano played a slow jazz tune, the kind that filled the silence, without asking questions. Sukong came out of the study, jacket slung over one shoulder, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The faint scar at his collarbone, her handiwork, was the only imperfection on him. "You should eat," he said softly. "You've been staring out that window for an hour." "I'm thinking," she replied. "About running away?" She turned. "Would you stop me if I did?" He smiled a little. "You already know the answer." Her heart thudded. There was no menace in his tone, only certainty, like gravity acknowledging the pull between them. He came closer, stopping just behind her, and the warmth of his breath brushed her neck. "You saved my life, Sandra," he whispered. "Don't make me waste it chasing you." She wanted to say something sharp, but the words melted when his fingers slid around her waist. The city lights reflected in the window, her dark skin against his pale hands, two contrasts tangled in a world that should have kept them apart. "People are talking," she murmured. "Let them. They call you a murderer." He didn't flinch. "They're not wrong." That honesty stunned her more than denial would have. She turned in his arms, looking up into those eyes that never quite let anyone in. "Why tell me that?" "Because I'd rather you hate the truth than love a lie." His hand moved to her cheek. "And because you make me want to be better, even when I don't know how." She swallowed hard. "You can start by letting me go to work." He chuckled, low and rough. "Tomorrow. Sukang." He kissed her before she could finish. A firm, searching kiss that stole her breath and left the snow outside forgotten. When he finally pulled back, she was trembling. "You terrify me," she whispered. "I terrify everyone," he said. "You're the only one who stays." Later that night, Sandra lay awake beside him, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. Beneath the smooth sheets, she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back, proof that he was still human, still vulnerable. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it quietly, careful not to wake him. The screen showed a single message from an unknown number. "He killed my brother. You're next." Her breath caught. She looked towards Sukang. He was still asleep, features softened in rare peace. She deleted the message, switched off the phone, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Sandra sat at the marble counter, trying to calm her nerves. Sukang's right-hand man, Ji-hoon, poured her a cup. "You shouldn't ignore threats," he said. She froze. "You saw the message?" Ji-hoon's lips twitched. "I see everything that happens in this house." "Then tell your boss to stop dragging me into his wars." Ji-hoon hesitated. "He doesn't drag people, Dr. Nwosu. They get caught in his gravity. Including me." Before she could reply, Sukang walked in, crisp and black, phone pressed to his ear. His expression was darker than usual. "What happened?" Sandra asked. He ended the call. "A warehouse exploded last night. Someone sending a message." She felt a chill. "From the same people who texted me?" He met her eyes. "You got a message?" Silence hung. Then, quietly, she admitted, "Yes." Something dangerous flickered in him. "You should have told me. I didn't want you to kill them." He stepped closer. "They threatened you." "Sukang, violence won't fix everything." "Maybe not," he said, "but it's the only language they understand." He left the room before she could stop him, coat flaring behind him like a shadow. That evening, snow had turned to sleet. Sandra stood by the window again, waiting. The city stretched beneath her, cold, glittering, indifferent. She wondered what he was doing, whether he was still alive. The elevator chimed. She turned just as Sukang entered, soaked, blood spattered on his sleeve. Her heart lurched. "Are you hurt?" "Not my blood," he said softly, almost apologetic. "It's done." Her knees weakened. What did you do?" He reached out to touch her, but she stepped back. "You said you wanted to be better." His jaw tightened. "I wanted you safe." "By killing someone?" He exhaled. "You don't understand this world." "Then teach me," she said, eyes glistening. "Teach me why love has to be written in blood." He stared at her for a long time. Then slowly he went down on one knee, not in proposal, but exhaustion. "I don't know how to love any other way." Sandra knelt too, pulling his hands into hers. "Then let me show you." He looked up, something breaking behind his eyes. The snow outside softened the city lights until they looked like fallen stars. That night, he didn't touch her out of hunger but out of fear. Fear of losing the only person who had ever reached for him without flinching. And somewhere in the quiet between their heartbeats, the ruthless man of Seoul began to change. The morning after the warehouse incident, Seoul looked deceptively peaceful. Sandra walked briskly through the glass doors of Seoul General, her ID badge flashing beneath her coat. People smiled at her in the hallway, the same smiles she'd learned to read as curiosity mixed with gossip. Overnight, photographs of her and Sukong had appeared on a gossip site, The Doctor Who Tamed the Devil. Her stomach turned every time she thought about it. When she reached the locker room, her friend and fellow resident, Dr. Eunmi, was waiting. "You've been on every blog in the city," Eunmi said, tossing her phone on the bench. "Sandra, is it true? Are you really with him?" Sandra pressed her lips together. "I'm not answering that. You don't have to. Everyone's already decided you are." "Then let them," Sandra said. "I have rounds." Eunmi caught her arm. "Be careful. That man doesn't belong in hospitals or in your life." Sandra managed a faint smile. "Neither did a bullet in his chest, but I dealt with that." The day passed in a blur of white coats and clipped voices. She handled patients, stitched wounds, checked vitals, but every ring of her phone made her flinch. At lunch, she finally looked. "Sukong, dinner tonight. No arguments." She typed a single reply. "We need to talk." The restaurant was high above the city, glass walls framing Seoul's lights like a galaxy beneath them. Sandra wore a simple black dress. Her braids were pulled into a neat bun. Sukong waited by the window in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. "You look tired," he said as she sat. "And you look like trouble," she replied. He chuckled quietly. "Maybe that's why we fit." They ate mostly in silence until she finally said, "People are talking, Kong. They're investigating me at the hospital." He set down his fork. "Then I'll make it stop."
How?
"By threatening someone." He leaned forward. "By buying the hospital." Her eyes widened. "You can't." "I can," he interrupted. "And I will, if it keeps them off you." She pushed back her chair. "That's not how love works." He stood to the table between them. "Then tell me how it does. Because all I know is protecting what's mine." Her voice softened. "I'm not something to be protected. I'm someone to be trusted." For a long moment neither moved. Then he sighed, shoulders dropping. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "Then learn," she whispered. They left the restaurant in silence. The city blurred past, neon streaks against the rain. Sandra turned toward him. "Why me, Sukong? You could have anyone." He kept his eyes on the road. "Because you didn't look away when you saw who I am. And if one day I can't live with what you do." He smiled faintly, pain behind it. "Then I'll stop doing it." Before she could answer, headlights flared behind them. A black SUV swerved into their lane. Another followed. Sukong cursed, jerking the wheel. "Hold on." Gunshots shattered the night. Glass exploded around them. Sandra ducked, heart pounding. The car skidded into a side street and stopped behind an abandoned warehouse. Sukong drew a pistol from beneath the seat, calm, practiced. "Stay here," he ordered. "No," she said, grabbing his sleeve. "You'll get killed." He looked at her once, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Then he was gone into the rain. Inside the warehouse. The fight was short, brutal. Sandra heard shouts, shots, silence. When the door finally creaked open again, Sukong staggered through, blood on his arm. She ran to him, pressing her hands to the wound. "You're insane." He winced but smiled. "And you're still here. Because someone has to keep you alive." Back at the penthouse. She stitched his arm in the dim light of the living room. His eyes never left her face. "Every time I get hurt," he murmured, "I think maybe it'll make you leave. And every time you survive," she said, tying off the thread, "I think maybe it'll make you stay." He caught her wrist, voice low. "If I asked you to marry me tonight, would you say yes?" Her hands froze. "Is that a proposal or a threat?" "Both." She laughed softly despite herself. You're impossible. Then I'll keep asking until it sounds possible. He leaned forward and kissed her, slow, deliberate, the taste of rain still on his lips. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, "You don't even know how to be normal." "Then teach me," he said again. And for the first time, she wanted to. Days later, the tabloids called it the most unlikely romance in Korea. The underworld called it weakness. His enemies called it opportunity. Sandra tried to ignore them all, but the threats returned. Letters, calls, whispers. Sukong tightened security. Guards followed her everywhere. Yet the closer danger came, the more he tried to hold her close. One night, she found him standing alone on the balcony, staring at the city below. "I can't lose you," he said without turning. "Then stop giving the world reasons to take you away," she replied. He looked at her then, eyes dark as midnight. "Marry me." She blinked.
What?
"Not someday.
Now.
Sukong." He took her hands. "You once told me to learn trust. This is me trying." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Okay." The wedding was small, hidden from the world, held in a lantern-lit temple outside the city. Snow fell again, covering the stone steps like a blessing. When the monk pronounced them husband and wife, Sukong slipped a ring onto her finger and whispered, "From now on, anyone who touches you touches me." She smiled faintly. "You really need better vows." But when he kissed her, the rest of the world disappeared. That night, as they stood together beneath the temple eaves watching the snow, Sandra said quietly, "Do you think love can survive your world?" He answered without hesitation, "It's the only thing that ever will." For the first time in months, the house was still. Sandra woke to the scent of roasted coffee and the muted hum of morning traffic far below. A band of sunlight cut across the silk sheets where Sukong sat at the edge of the bed, jacket half-buttoned, expression unreadable. "You're working again," she said, voice still heavy with sleep. "Business doesn't stop because I got married," he answered, softer than before. "Then make it stop." He looked back at her. The dark eyes that once carried only violence now held something fragile, fear of losing what he had found. He brushed her cheek. "One day, when this last thing is done." She smiled faintly. "You always say that." By noon he was gone, leaving a note in neat handwriting. "Meeting the Han Syndicate. Don't leave the apartment. I love you." Those 3 words frightened her more than any threat. Outside, snow drifted lazily. Inside, she paced the living room, replaying every warning Ji-hoon had ever given. The Han Syndicate doesn't negotiate. They replace kings. At dusk her phone rang. Ji-hoon's voice was clipped, urgent. "He's been ambushed. North Docks. Don't come." The line went dead. Sandra didn't think. She just moved. Coat, keys, car. Wind howled off the water, scattering snow like ash. She found the cars first, black SUVs, doors open, bullet holes glittering. Then she saw him. Sukong stood between 2 shipping containers, blood soaking his shirt, gun dangling at his side. Around him, the Han lieutenants lay motionless. Ji-hoon knelt nearby, clutching a wound. Sandra ran forward. "Kong." He turned slowly, smile faint but real. "I told you not to leave the apartment." She pressed her hands to his chest. "You're bleeding. I've had worse." "You're not dying here," she said, voice breaking. "Not like this." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. Sukong caught her face between his palms. "Listen to me. When they come, you tell them you didn't know. You were never part of this. I'm not leaving you." He kissed her then, deep, desperate, tasting of salt and iron. "You already saved me once," he whispered. "Don't try to do it again." But she stayed until the blue lights washed over the docks. The papers called it the fall of the dragon. Evidence poured in, money trails, weapons caches, confessions. Ji-hoon disappeared. Sukong refused to speak except to ask one thing of his lawyer. Keep her name clean. Sandra sat through every hearing, head held high despite the reporters, the stares, the whispers. the doctor who married the devil. When the sentence came, 20 years without parole, she felt something inside her crack, but not break. After the courtroom emptied, he motioned her forward. The guards hesitated, then stepped back. "You should forget me," he said through the glass. "I can't," she replied. "You can."
No.
Because somewhere between all the blood and fear, you became human. He smiled, small, almost peaceful. Then maybe that's enough. 5 years later, spring returned to Seoul. Sandra walked out of Seoul General in her new position as chief resident, a white coat over a pastel dress. The world had moved on. So had she, at least enough to breathe again. She still wrote him once a month, letters about surgeries, sunsets, ordinary things. He never replied, but every envelope was accepted at the prison gate. One evening, as she locked up her office, the security guard handed her a package. Inside was a single white rose and a note written in the same steady hand she knew by heart. "You taught me how to stop bleeding. Now it's your turn to live. SK." She stood there a long time, smiling through tears. 10 years later, a small clinic opened on Jeju Island, Nuosu Healing Center. Locals said the woman who ran it had once saved a dangerous man. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she walked to the shore and watched the horizon. Cargo ships glowed faintly in the distance, dots of light moving through the dark. She never knew which one he might be on. But every spring, without fail, a single white rose arrived by post, and she knew he was still somewhere in the world, still trying to keep his promise to live. Sandra would place the rose in a glass jar by her window, whisper a prayer, and return to her patients. Because love, she had learned, doesn't always end with forever. Sometimes it ends with peace.